Third.
Good evening, or good afternoon, I should say.
It's evening. Folks, this is Mr. Hurd, and he founded our lovely community.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey.
I'm Zyber Hurd. I'm credited with being the founder, if you will, of the village by virtue of being the first purchaser of any land here within the village. I'm a native of Vermont, and in 1816, on my way here, I stopped in off at the land office in Canandaigua and discussed purchase of some land here. Now, in 1816, that's when this area right here became available, and so I, by luck or draw of the lot, if you will, ended up being the first purchaser. I purchased about 400 acres right here in the northern part of the village, including this very ground we stand on right here, and it cost about $3.50 an acre. Now I ended up, by the time I did all that and got here, it was mid-July of 1816, and normally you would of course expect in July to be weather like we're having today. Unfortunately, 1816 was the year that we eventually called the year without a summer. Of course, at that time we didn't realize why, but that particular year there was frost or snow every month of the year. So I got here, my closest relative, or my closest neighbors, was Mr. Whaley's Tavern up on Allegheny Road on the way to Perry. Perhaps some of you passed it tonight. But other than that, this was just dense forest. And so, of course, in typical pioneer fashion, my first necessity was to build a small lean-to and clear some land. And that occupied the rest of that summer of 1816. And so I cleared some land over on Main Street and built a lean-to and headed back to Vermont. And to, of course, return in the spring of 1817, hoping for better weather. We came back in 1817 with family and ox cart and some potash kettles and basically all my worldly possessions. And so that's where we started. Also, my brother-in-law, Mr. Gilbert, came along with us. Now, you might ask why I brought potash kettles. Well, as a settler, everything was forest, and of course you've got to get rid of the land, the trees, so you can work the land and plant some crops. And the only thing the trees are good for, other than building yourself a house, is to burn for ash. And that was typical pioneer fashion. We would cut down the trees and bunch them up, start a big fire and turn it into ash, and take those ashes and then turn them into our first cash crop. And because of that need, I, in 1818, established the first ashery here within the village. And an ashery was very important because while you could take and sell your ashes, if you could get them to market, they were worth a few cents a pound. But what was much more valuable was the black salts, or the saltpeter, because that's a key ingredient in gunpowder and other items. And you needed an ashery to take those raw ashes and turn them into a much more valuable crop. So in 1817, some more settlers came in. In 1818, a few more settlers came in. And it didn't take too long before the population here started to grow. And by 1821, those of us who were in the village and the surrounding farms surrounding the rest of what's today Castile decided that we wanted to break away from Perry, because up until that time we were actually part of Perry, and this was actually called Wolf Creek, by the way. The village, as it became known when I first settled it, was actually called Wolf Creek. And so in 1821 we broke away from Perry and became the town of Castile. And as being the first settler and one of the more prominent businessmen, by this time I had an ashery and a folding house with a carding machine, and I was also had a sawmill going by this time. I was elected the first supervisor here to represent the town. And it wasn't too long after that because we were now a growing village with a name, we got a post office, and I ended up becoming the first official postmaster here, as well as the mail would come through Moscow into Perry. And some of you newer settlers may not realize what Moscow, but us older settlers, Moscow is what I think you call today Leicester. No. At any rate, the village grew, and I got involved in building several of the first churches, and was involved, of course, in many of the early businesses. And of course, I had 400 acres here, most of which eventually ended up being parceled off. And so I spent a good portion of my life really trying to grow the village here and see it expand, and welcome new settlers in, and sell slowly piecemeal out my 400 acres into the individual lots and building lots that you see today. And being born in 1785, you got to remember that by 1816 I was already past, well, I was already 31 years old, and starting out as a pioneer and with really nothing at age 31 is a task unto itself. And so later, by the 1840s, after my first wife died in 1845, I did remarry, but my health started to decline, and I spent the last few years of my life in somewhat declining health, typical pioneer fashion. But I'm proud to say that this chance I took, again, I stopped in Canandaigua and bought this land sight unseen, only from the land agent's description of heavily wooded land with a nearby flowing creek, and took a chance, and it certainly has turned out to be a very great village. Does anyone have any questions at all?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. As she has said, I am Dr. Cordelia A. I was born on the 5th day of July in the year 1831. When I turned 16, I got my teaching certificate. I taught many country schools around the area until the year 1849, when my father acquired the water cure, sometimes called the sanitarium, here in this village of Castile. At that time, water cures were very, very popular in our community, in our area, in our country. And many people with chronic diseases came from all over to receive treatment with this water cure. The essence of water cure was drinking lots of water, taking lots of baths, and lots of outside exercise. When my father acquired the sanitarium and the water cure, I quit my job as a teacher and decided to help him at the water cure. In 1864, Elizabeth Blackwell became the first female physician. I decided that year I would be a female physician as well. I went to medical school, and after I graduated, I worked as a physician at the Clifton Springs Water Cure. And when my father died, I came back home and took over the water cure that was up the road from here in Castile. I was dedicated and committed to helping people live healthy, productive, and meaningful lives. I even wrote a book on the art of living well. You can find that book today in the public library. But I was not only a physician. I cared deeply about the things that were happening to women in our society. For many years, I was involved with the Wyoming County Suffrage Image Booklet of Copeland, Political Equality Association Club, and I served as the president for many years. I was so adamant that women should have the right to vote that one year I decided not to pay my taxes because I would not pay taxes if I could not vote. My involvement with the women's suffrage allowed me to meet women who were deeply committed to this cause. I met women like Susan B. Anthony, Mary Livermore, and Frances Fuller. They even came to Casa and used my home as a resting place. I believed so much in the women's suffrage, I donated $500 that count to publish the book on the history of suffrage movement. I also believed that everyone who lived or walked the face of this earth should have access to free information. So I gave $12,000 as an endowment to start the library here in this community. I also gave $500 for books, and then I donated the land where the library would be built. In 1897, the community built a beautiful library, which is considered a neoclassical style building, with the idea that an addition could be put onto it many years later, which I have noticed has happened. And the community was so gracious in naming that library after me, and it now sits 100 years and later as the Cordelia A. Green Library. I never married, but I adopted 6 kids because I loved and cared deeply for kids and wanted to do my part in helping those who needed a better life. Today, as I look back, I am so proud of the work I did in helping to provide the opportunity for women to vote. Today, all women can vote. Today, there are over 300,000 female physicians. Today, everyone has the right to free information. Although I'm passionate about the things I've shared with you so far, the thing that is most important to me is my faith. It guided me in my work as a physician, as a suffrage, and it also guided my convictions. When they laid me to rest in the year 1905, they placed on my tombstone, "I know whom I have believed, and I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed unto him against that day." This lives as a reminder to everyone who comes to my stone. I know that many people have come and have been inspired by it. I know that the little Jamaican librarian that worked there at the library for almost 20 years came and visited my stone and read this inscription many, many times. I say to you this evening, be inspired, think about this, and let it be your guiding light. Thank you for visiting me today.
Previous couple of speakers were fantastic. I'm going to have to break convention and be not so fantastic. I'm going to have to go in the third person and work off some notes, which I've already found are incorrect, because originally when I looked through census data, I was under the assumption that Vernon Aiken had no children, but now I see he did. Okay, so going from there, I also have noticed when I was doing my searches there are still quite a few Aikens in the area. And I believe, according to the website, your fire department even has a captain by the name of Aiken. Yep. So they're still around. Okay, Vernon G Aiken, born in 1842, son of Charles and Mary Aiken, in the town of Hume. Where exactly is Hume? That way? The 1850 census showed that Charles was a farmer by trade, father. He and his wife had 3 children. Vernon was the eldest. He was 8 years old at the time. Harriet was 5, and Helen was just born. The 1860 census shows the same family structure, but Charles is now 17. Of course, the war starts in 1861. Charles would be 18. 2.5 years later, Charles enlists. He's 21 years old by then. And he enlisted as a private on December 23rd at the recruiting post in the town of Hume. So that's where he recruited out of. Back then, enlisting late was frowned upon unless you had good reason to. None of the papers I came across explained why he enlisted late. One might assume that he stayed in to help with or stayed out to help with the farm, having 2 younger daughters. Perhaps one or both of the parents were ill. It's also possible that he went along with the draft, because the draft was instated then. He enlisted. He went into the 4th New York Heavy Artillery. At the time, the 4th had been stationed in and around Washington, D.C. At the beginning of the war, Washington, D.C. was in peril of being overrun by the Confederates. As you might recall your history, after First Manassas, the very first battle, or Bull Run, depending on what the Confederates call. First Manassas, the Federals lost, and they were in sheer terror and panic that the Confederates would be assaulting Washington shortly. So Lincoln put out the call for regiments to get down there as fast as possible. So they erected a string of forts around Washington, and the 4th New York Heavy Artillery was one of the units that garrisoned those forts. So for the next 2 and change years, that's where they stayed, was in those forts. Nice, cushy, safe place to be. They were not at Antietam. They were not at any of the other big battles up until 63. Actually, it's 1864. They missed Gettysburg, they missed Chancellorsville, they missed the Valley Campaign. Okay. When Charles joined the 4th New York, they were still in garrison around the city. And the garrison troops thought they were going to be safe. We're not sure if that's why Charles joined the 4th. Didn't really say. However, they weren't as safe as they thought. Most units, a field unit, would suffer between 20 and 40% casualties by the end of the war. About half of those being due to enemy action and about half of that due to disease. The 4th New York Heavy Artillery, by the end of their service, had 2,500 men who served. Out of those 2,500, 454 men died. 3/4 of those were due to disease, and most of them died of disease while they were still garrisoned around Washington. So take your pick, enemy action or disease. You think you're safe? You're not. So the regiment lost 454, 8 officers and 108 men were killed or mortally wounded. 4 officers and 343 enlisted men died of disease. Why do you think, in a nice, safe garrison camp around Washington, D.C., one of the most modern cities of its time, why do you think 3/4 of the casualties up to that time were due to disease? Anybody? Lack of good water?
Close surroundings.
Close surroundings. You have almost 100,000 troops garrisoned around Washington, D.C., all packed in together. If one man gets sick, everybody gets sick. So when this was, like I said before, December of 1863, tail end, everybody thinks, well, the war's winding down, maybe perhaps General McClellan will win the elections. Okay, March of 1864, U.S. Grant was appointed commander of all forces. If you know your history, U.S. Grant didn't believe in sitting around on your butt in defenses. Unlike previous federal commanders, Grant did not favor a defensive war. He felt that the tens of thousands of troops around Washington would put to better use out in the field. So in March of 1864, about 3 months after Vernon enlisted, they were taken out of the defenses of Washington. Some of the men of the 4th Heavy Artillery were given field pieces, 3-inch ordnance rifles. The rest were given muskets and said, congratulations, you're now infantry. Now you're not safe anymore. And I have a list of battles that they saw in the short time. This is just for a little bit over a year. And bear with me, it's a long list. A little over a year, one unit saw this amount of action. They were in Louisville on July 6th and October 1st. There were battles there. The Rapidan Campaign, May and June of 64. The Wilderness, May 5th through 7th. Spotsylvania, May 8th through 12th. Piney Branch Church, May 8th. Laurel Hill, May 10th. Spotsylvania Courthouse, May 12th through 21st. Landrum's Farm, May 18th. North Anna River, May 23rd through 26th. The line of the Tatapotamoy River, 28th through 31st. Cold Harbor, June 1st through 12th, and then they wound up in front of Petersburg starting on June 16th. So now they're in the trenches of Petersburg. Nice safe place to be? June 16th, Jerusalem Plank Road battle, Weldon Railroad battle, June 22nd, 23rd, Deep Bottom. They were at the mine explosion in the Battle of the Crater. On July 30th, Strawberry Plains, Deep Bottom, August 14th, Reams Station, Poplar Springs, Peoples Farms, Boyden Plank Road, Hatcher's Run again, Dabney's Mills, Hatcher's Run again, Watkins House March. They were in on the Appomattox campaign, Hatcher's Run again, White Oak Road, Sutherland Station, the fall of Petersburg, Pursuit of Lee, April 3rd through 9th, Amelia Springs, Sailors Creek, Farmville, April 7th, and they were at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th when it all ended. And they marched back to Washington on between May 2nd and May 12th. So a nice safe unit, the 4th Heavy Artillery was. They saw more service in 1 year than most other units did their whole 2 or 3 years term of service. So Charles was officially mustered out of service as a private on May 8th of 65 at the military depot in Elmira. He returned back to the area and settled down. He never shows up on the 1870 or 1880 census. I couldn't find him on any records. So it's unknown exactly where he lived or what his profession was. At some point he met and married a woman named Cornelia. Here's Vernon, here's Cornelia. And because she was listed on his pension papers. Nowhere in the records could I find that he had children. However, I get here, we see he had a child, Charlie W. and Maud. It doesn't look by the dates that they lived very long. They weren't all that old. He joined the Grand Army of the Republic Post, the GIR post right here in Cast Isle. He passed away in Genesee Falls on September 26, 1885 at the age of 43. No cause was listed. And his wife Cornelia was last listed in the 1910 census as living right here in Cast Isle with grandniece and nephews. So that was Charlie's military career and a little bit of his early life and his late life. That's what I could find.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
This is Sergeant, then he was promoted to Corporal Isaac Baker.
Isaac Baker enlisted when the 130th was formed here in Cast Isle. Actually, they surrounded the area. Colonel Gibbs was commissioned by the governor to form the 130th New York Light Infantry. Colonel Gibbs was a cavalry commander during the Mexican War, so he preferred to ride. But he was given an infantry command. They formed up over the summer of '62, and they were all housed over at the far side of Letcher State Park in what is called Camp Williams, which is now known as the parade grounds. Now, Isaac Baker, he enlisted in the town of Cast Isle in August of '62. He was mustered in over at Camp Williams in September, next day actually, the 7th. He was a member of Company A. He went in as infantry. They left by Elmira train the end of September, and they were taken to Washington where they were outfitted. And they marched as infantry throughout the first part of the war, ending up at Gettysburg in 1863. Shortly after Gettysburg, the 130th was given the honor of to be able to convert to cavalry, one of the few units that was actually completely converted to cavalry. Many of the infantry units were made into what is called mounted infantry. They used horses but still carried their long muskets. The 130th was given a new commission. They were called the 19th New York Cavalry for all of a month, the month of August of '63. They were told to go to Manassas Junction for retraining. They were given horses, turned in their Enfield muskets, were given pistols and swords and Joslin rifles and horses and retrained. They chased a lot of Mosby's men around the Manassas area for quite a long time before they moved out of the area. They continued on through Yellow Tavern and on through all the battles that they went through. As you read the 1st New York Dragoon history. They didn't like the name 19th New York, so in September, the unit itself petitioned the governor of New York State to change their name. They wanted to be called the 1st New York Dragoons. So the governor said, sounds good to me, you're the 1st New York Dragoons. So in September of '63, they became the Dragoons. So Isaac rode with them as they continued on through their history, through many of the different cavalry battles throughout, down to Yellow Tavern, ending up in Appomattox at the end of the war. And then after that they were returned. They did a short stint with Sherman as he marched towards the Atlantic coast, and then they headed back north. And in June 30th of '65, they got as far as Cloud Mills, Virginia, where they disbanded the 1st New York Dragoons, and they were all sent home. So he came back to Cast Isle and lived here with his wife, Emily. And I didn't really get an opportunity to look much into his family life here in Cast Isle, but they stayed here for the rest of his life, and he died at the nice age of 79 in 1914, in October. He was born in, he went in the service at age 26. He was born in 1835.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Marcellus B. Card.
Hello. My name is Marcellus B. Card. I was born in 1844. Worked on a family farm as a young child. And I wanted to enroll and serve the country at 17 years old. But the legal age to enroll is 18. So I took a piece of paper and wrote the number 18 on it, put it in my shoe underneath my foot, and swore that I was 18, over 18. When I was enlisted, it was August 4th, 1862, in Gainesville, New York. January 25th, I was discharged as cast out because of disability. I had an arm wounded in battle, and I was sent home. For the rest of my life, I worked with the family on the farm, and I died of old age in 1906. That's it.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Morning, man. Morning, folks. My name is Private Henry L. Cummins. Started off in 1862 with the 130th New York Volunteer Infantry. Sitting here talking with my old parts in the Civil War here in my unit. Reminiscing about the old days. When I listed first, I was 24 years old, joined up, Company A, 130th New York Volunteer Infantry. We served throughout the war, a lot of skirmishes, fought a lot of different guerrilla warfare, a lot of big time, like General Grant, a bunch of other guys like that. Then we went off and they sent us back to Washington, where we formed up, became the 19th New York Cavalry, where we learned how to fight with wooden swords until we got our real swords. And then after that, they gave us our real equipment, sent us back off in the field, and we became the 1st New York Dragoons. We started doing a little picket duty, a lot of drill. We did a lot of guerrilla warfare fighting for a while, chasing after Colonel Mosby and a few of the other just wild bunches that were in the woods there in the Shenandoah Valley. We ended up at a battle called Trevilian Station. It was the biggest cavalry battle on the East Coast in the Civil War. It was pretty hot and heavy for a while. I got wounded, got shot in the hip, so they took me back to the back lines. They picked me up, sent me out to the hospital in Maryland for a while. Eventually I got sent back here to Castile, where they patched me up and they healed me up. And started back on my feet, hoping to get back in the field before the end of the war. But they ended up discharging me on June 15th, 1865, for disabilities, saying I couldn't return to fight because of my gun wound. Almost made it to the end of the war, but they wouldn't let me back in to finish out with my unit, only a little bit short. So after that, I ended up here, finished out my days with the family. We lost our daughter Lily here at age 49. And July 20th, 1874, she passed away before me and her mother did. It's a sad day for us. That was a bad, bad day. After that, you know, we grew old and now we rest right here in Castile. So thank y'all for coming and visit me. We don't get many settlers here anymore.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, I'm George Stanley Baker. I was born in Rome, New York in 1906. I had my early education, elementary and high school in Rome, New York. Then I went to Columbia University, graduated there, and then went to Harvard Medical School for 6 years and got my degree there. I interned and residenced in Rochester General Hospital, and it was there that I met my lovely wife, Isabel. Don't laugh.
I was born in 1910 in Perry, New York. My parents were Albert and Eva Payne. I was one of 9 children. I went to Perry High School, and then I went to get my nursing degree at Rochester General Hospital. Stanley and I were married in 1935, and we had 2 children, Peter, Ann, and David, and we have 6 grandchildren. And when he opened his doctor's office, I was his office nurse.
So when we came to Castile in 1935, we actually moved around a little. We were in 4 different houses before we wound up at the house on Main Street, where he stayed there for 36 years. Total time in Castile was 43 years. We did a lot of delivering babies. We delivered over 1,000 babies. Some of them he started out delivering them at home, of course, and then as the hospital in Warsaw became more easier to get to, really, instead of horse and buggy or a Model A or a Model T, then they started going to the hospital to be delivered. I did find out that Doc, even though he was always serious when I went in, well, not when I went in there, I was a character. Let's put it that way. You wouldn't know that because when I took care of people, I was very professional in the way I went about it. things that I did is I always had my little black satchel, and if somebody was ill, sick, I actually opened up my satchel. I went in and got the pills out and put them in a little paper envelope. So basically, I was dispensing medications, of which obviously is very illegal now, but he was handing out most any kind of medications, penicillin, stuff like that. So we retired in, when we retired there.
Don't you remember?
I can't remember. Was it
78.
78, that's what I thought. We retired in 1978, and the community threw us a big celebration up in the village park. We then moved up to Merchant Road, and I passed away at the age of 79, and you passed away?
At the age of 96, or 86.
86, she passed away. But we did spend a good deal of time here in Cast Isle, and I dare say a good share of the people on this end of this side of the cemetery were probably patients of his.
I got some of his handiwork on me.
What's that?
I got some of his handiwork on me.
Yeah, yeah. And if I wasn't Dr. Baker, he did take care of me.
Good evening, Clara. Before Clara talks to us, I'd like to invite all of you to the church following our walk through the cemetery. You're all welcome to come for our community hymn sing and refreshments following. And Zeb Hurd, wherever you went, if you missed his little speech, he will come back and talk to us at the church. So, this is Clara Swain. Good evening.
Good evening. I am Clara Swain, and I was the world's first female medical missionary. I was born in July 18th, 1834 in nearby Elmira, but when I was just a little girl, our family moved to Cast Isle. I had 9 older brothers and sisters. I was the youngest one of 10 in the family. When I was 8 years old, I joined the Methodist Church right up here, and it greatly influenced me in my later life. When I was 21, I started teaching private students right here in Cast Isle. But I started becoming very interested in caring for sick people. So I was at a very good place because of the Cast Isle Sanitarium, and I went with Dr. Cordelia Green, and I began my medical training right there. 3 years later, I went down to Pennsylvania to the Women's Medical College, and I graduated at the age of 34. Soon after that, I received a letter from the director of a girls' orphanage asking for a female physician to aid their village in India. They needed a female physician because the ladies were not allowed to have male doctors. So on November 3rd of that year, I left New York. I went to Beverly. The voyage was so rough. I was so sick. I had to take care of 5 other sick people on the voyage. Even now, I can hardly stand to think of the sea. It treated me so badly. It was just a horrible trip. January 20th, I finally reached my destination. I started my work that day. I got there in the morning and started working right away. My luggage was a week later. It had all my supplies, all my medical equipment, all my clothes. But that didn't stop me. I started working right away that day. I didn't even know the language. But that was a very good year for me. I treated over 1,300 patients that year. I trained 17 female medical students. Within 4 years, I built a women's hospital and medical school. It was named after me. It was the first women's hospital in all of Asia. The hospital was located on 42 acres of land. It was generously given to me by the Nawab of Rampur. I still remember I was so scared and nervous when I went to ask him for some help. And I remember how surprised I was. He said, "Take it. It's yours. I give it to you with great pleasure." Oh my goodness, he had previously sworn that he would never allow a Christian missionary in his city. For the next 27 years, I treated thousands of women and children with all various kinds of diseases and illnesses. Many of my patients traveled from nearby countries to be admitted to my hospital. My work was so essential because even later, male doctors were still not allowed to treat women. But the most important thing to me was that I could use my skills as a doctor to gain an entrance into their lives and teach them about Jesus Christ and his love for them. If I were able to look ahead to 2016, I would be so happy to know that my hospital is still the largest hospital in Verily. It has all the specialty departments, it has world-class equipment and facilities, a very modern hospital. I've had so many exciting experiences. One time I nearly died in a flood. Another time I had a close call. I almost died riding an elephant on one of my journeys. I had a lot of adventures, and they were published in a book entitled A Glimpse of India. Well, my health began to fail, so I had to accept the post of court physician to the Raja, or Rajputana, a position I held for 10 years. But in 1896, I had to return to Castile, and I resided right up at 5 South Main Street. I had very poor health at this time, but once more in 1906, I was able to visit my beloved India. I died on Christmas Day in 1910 at the age of 76, and my poor, weary body was buried right